Well, good afternoon. I'm Sarah Wyant, the founder and editor of Agri-Pulse. And I'm really pleased to see such strong interest in our topic for our webinar today, which is growing new soy protein markets for global food security. We're going to hear from our distinguished speakers with facilitated questions and answers. And I'm going to first start out with some brief introductions and encourage you to dig into their full biographies on our website. We also want to hear from you, our attendees. So please feel free to offer your questions in the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen, not the chat box. If you're experiencing any technical issues, also, I'd like to encourage you to use the Q&A function to let us know, and our Zoom experts will help you out. In addition, we will be recording today's webinar, and it will be available later today on agri-pulse.com, our website. So I'd like to begin our program today by thanking our sponsors, the World Initiative for Soy and Human Health, the American Soybean Association, and the United Soybean Board. Thanks for all of those sponsors for making our webinar possible today. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Mac Marshall. Mac serves as the Vice President of Market Intelligence for the United Soybean Board. In this capacity, Mac works with USB leadership to evaluate and establish long-term strategic initiatives in support of advancing domestic and international market opportunities for the United States soybean industry. Marshall holds a BA in economics from Vassar College and an MA in applied economics from Johns Hopkins University. Mac, welcome, and looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and especially to any of our farmers out there who are joining today. We know it's the heart of harvest, and really appreciate you taking the time out of doing that incredibly critical work, not just for the U.S., but for abroad, to come and join today. So with that, rather than a traditional sort of economics presentation, which is what I usually give, full of charts, really what I want to do is take you through 5 numbers that are out there that I think help tell the story of where we are in the state of global food insecurity. And the first one of those is 15%. Now, what does 15% mean? Not that big number. We'll get to that next. 15%. At the end of 2021, or November 2021, according to estimates by the World Bank and Grow Intelligence, an analytics firm that oversees and looks at a lot of factors contributing to global agricultural productivity and markets, the world had 1.2 billion people in a state of food insecurity. And that's food insecurity as defined by living on $3.59 a day or less. 15% of the world. That's about 1 in 7 people, as we were in a population of about 7.9 billion people last year. So, I know we're all tuned in on a webinar, but the next time you're in a group of 7 or more people, look around and think that on a world level, one of those people would be food insecure. But unfortunately, back in November of 2021, we had not yet entered into a new period of global turmoil and disruption. And the February invasion by Russia into Ukraine has certainly roiled commodity markets and contributed to overall global food insecurity to a pretty significant factor here. And that is, I can get the slides to advance, that's the big number that we have here that I jumped ahead on earlier. Between November of last year and May of this year, according to those Grow Intelligence estimates, the ranks of the food insecure globally had ballooned from 1.2 billion to over 1.6 billion. We basically added 441 million people to the list of the food insecure globally. Now, as a reference point, there are about 340 million people within the United States. So it's like we've added a United States and 2.5 Canadas to the ranks of the food insecure just in that 6-month window. Ukraine, of course, is often been referred to as a breadbasket for Europe and the world. It's one of the largest exporters of wheat and corn, the largest exporter of sunflower seed oil, which is used in many parts of the world. And many of its destinations that it would typically ship to are low income or low to middle income countries. As a result, we've seen declining food availability for many around the world. And when it's been available, it's been at elevated prices. And to give you a sense of the severity of that, globally, and depending on territorial borders, I'm not going to adjudicate, disputed borders, but there are about 217 countries worldwide. 191 countries are experiencing food inflation in excess of 5% on an annual basis. Now, 5% might not sound a lot. In the United States, maybe our grocery bill goes from $100 to $105. Now, we'll come back to that later. Food price inflation in the US is outpacing that 5% figure, but 5% for the food insecure is a tremendous burden to bear. So 191 countries out of 217, the vast majority experiencing food price inflation in excess of 5%. For additional reference, 82 countries globally are classified as low income or low to middle income countries by the World Bank. And if you add up all of their populations, that's 4.1 billion people. More than half of the global population lives in low income and low to middle income countries. These are the most at-risk parts of the world when we see food supplies contract and when we see food prices rise. And part of the issue when food supplies contract, it's not simply born on a production basis. In the US, we're very fortunate to have the world's most efficient farmers who are able to produce a tremendous volume of commodity crops, of specialty crops, and we live in an area of bounty. But there are still pressures that come in. And there are other pressures that extend beyond the farm, because when we talk about food security, it's not just production, it's also distribution. And that's the last figure that I want to show you here, which is 7%. What does 7% mean? 7% is, according to the International Food Policy Research Institute, or IFPRI, they run a set of analysis on trade restrictions, which can be outright bans of exports of food or chemicals needed for the production of food, or export quotas or other restrictions. And 7% of the world's caloric markets are subject to some sort of trade disruption. Now, this spans across countries that both produce that produce exportable surplus, but countries that could be in that food insecure environment, those lower to middle income countries, or richer countries. But primarily, we're seeing restrictions, certainly out of the Black Sea. Through the course of the year, we've seen restrictions out of Indonesia, out of India, as countries have tried to exercise increased levels of food nationalism, which to a degree is understandable because you want to secure the availability of critical foodstuffs for your population, sometimes before putting it out into the world. But the fact is, the world of agriculture and food is something that binds all nearly 8 billion of us together. And the kinds of restrictions that are put in place while trying to protect a domestic population might be disadvantageous for people globally. And this is pretty staggering. The 7% figure is an improvement, actually. In the early days of the conflict in Ukraine, we saw a lot of trade restrictions, which actually took this number up to 15%, which compares very unfavorably with past incidences of notable food restrictions and or food export restrictions and price inflation. Two two moments here where we saw some pretty notable restrictions on trade were early on in the COVID pandemic, and some of that is, of course, due to supply chain issues, but also in the food price crisis of 2008 through 2009. So 7% is still elevated relative to those environments, but we have improved since where we were in the early stages of the conflict. So with that, I just wanted to do a little table setting that really underscores the severity and magnitude of what we're experiencing from a global food security standpoint. This is not to be alarmist, but just to state these are the numbers. This is where we are. But we do have good paths forward that happen through market development, that happen through technical knowledge transfer, and investing in growing our opportunities for exporters, and most importantly, for countries that are importing critical foodstuffs, such as soy. So with that bit of table setting, I would like to pass it back to Sarah, and I'll join you back for the question and answer part of the program. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mac. Those are just startling numbers about the problems that we're confronting when it comes to food security. And as we know, the intersection between what people are able to eat and how they survive is so crucial. Please keep in mind, if you have some follow-up questions for Mac, enter your questions into the Q&A portion of our webinar. And next, I'd like to welcome Gina Perry. Gina is the Executive Director for the WISH program, and that's a position she was tapped for just earlier this year. Previously, she served as WISH's Project Director for Global Strategy. She came to WISH after nearly 4 years with Agri-Pulse, a nonprofit focused on agricultural education in developing countries. So she's really had some good background for this job. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees in agribusiness from the University of Georgia. So welcome, Gina.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you all for joining us today, especially during your lunch break. We're excited to be here and talk more about global food security. So just a background on WISH, the World Initiative for Soy and Human Health is a program of the American Soybean Association. We really work at the intersection of trade and development. This is unique to other organizations in this space. Most organizations don't work both in the capacity building and in the market development. So WISH works to strengthen agricultural value chains in developing and emerging markets and to create long-term trade opportunities for US soy. We do this through the improvement of health, nutrition, and food security. So we work in 28 countries across Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia. And I know that, you heard some pretty daunting numbers from Mac earlier. And like he said, it's not to be alarmist, but it is the reality on the ground. And that's really been exacerbated over the past couple of years due to a number of factors. So, the good thing is that soy provides a great possible solution to help address food security issues. And in many countries that WISH works in, food insecurity is a very big problem. There's also a high protein gap. And that protein gap means that there's more protein being demanded than what's produced locally. So WISH really works to make protein more accessible and affordable. And so when we think of the term food security, while very complex, we always come back to two words: making food accessible and affordable. And so WISH works in a variety of ways to make protein accessible and more affordable. So we do this through the consumption of eggs, chicken, fish, and soy and human food. We work with aquaculture and poultry feed, both with producers and on the feed mill side, to incorporate the usage of high quality feed that also includes soy as its protein source. We work with them on training new technologies, improved management practices, really laying that groundwork for what they need to continue to build their business and have more efficient production practices as well. We also work with food companies that incorporate soy protein into beverages and foods that they sell to consumers, as well as institutional feeding programs. And by strengthening these value chains, we're working to improve food security as well as creating new markets for U.S. soy. So global food security is a hot topic right now, but it's been at the heart of what WISH does since its inception over 20 years ago. And a couple of years ago, our farmers realized that soy wasn't being included in the conversation on global food security, whether that was intentional or not. We know that soy provides a complete protein and a potential solution to address more affordable and accessible protein. So food security is a key focus area of our strategic plan that we launched this year. And we have been working with the United Soybean Board to reach out to new partners in the global food security space to continue these conversations, figure out how we can work together to provide global food security solutions around the world, especially in developing emerging markets where WISH works. We've had meetings with the U.S. Agency for International Development, U.S. Department of Agriculture, grower leaders, members of academia, on how to build strategic partnerships within the U.S. industry to help address these concerns. So one partnership that came from these meetings was Adizia Nutrition. They are based in Rhode Island, and they make ready-to-use therapeutic foods and ready-to-use supplemental foods to treat acute malnutrition. And so these products, they're manufactured in Rhode Island, and they use all U.S. commodities, which include U.S. soy. And so these products are shipped to more than 60 countries around the world and purchased by programs like UNICEF, the UN and World Food Program, as well as local NGOs that work in these developing countries. So their current demand, Adizia's current demand for US soy flour is about 7.5 million pounds, which equates to approximately 170,000 bushels of US soy. And the US Agency for International Development recently increased their investment in ready-to-use therapeutic foods. And so Adizia is looking to increase their need of soy flour by almost double in the coming year to address the growing need for this product around the world. So as food security concerns continue to grow, it's important as ever to have US soy working to provide a complete protein and a solution to address these challenges all around the world. So WISH continues to grow its partnerships. And we do this in line with USB's new vision to deliver sustainable soy solutions to every life, every day. And we look forward to having continued conversations with those of you that are on this webinar. If there's a way that we can work together, we definitely welcome that conversation. So back to you, Sarah.
So thank you, Gina, for those that overview of what WISH does, and very, very, very important work. Next, we're going to turn to someone who is producing soybeans and is taking a break from his very busy harvest schedule to share a little bit of his perspective. So I'd like to welcome Maury Hill, who's a fourth-generation farmer whose farm is located near Perry, Iowa. He grows soybeans and corn and is a director of the American Soybean Association Board, as well as vice chair of the WISH Program Committee. He graduated from Iowa State University, go Cyclones, and he is here with us today to share a little bit more about his perspective of growing new soybean protein markets for global food security. So Maury, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Sarah, and good day, everyone. Appreciate all who have joined us today in this webinar at a very busy time. Gina laid out the background and what WISH does in a very organized and great overview. I myself would like to give a few more specifics of some actual stuff I've seen in my travels with WISH to Cambodia. I've had the opportunity to go to Cambodia twice. The first time was in January of 20. And then the opportunity arose again to revisit Cambodia this past June, summer of 22. WISH, along with USDA, has a program that was started almost 5 years ago that we call CAST. It stands for the Commercialization of Aquaculture for Sustainable Trade. Cambodians love to eat fish, and we are trying to help them, along with the help of USDA, feed their aquaculture better so that they can have better fish for their customers and provide protein, like Gina was talking about, to all the population. One of the biggest advancements that we saw from the almost 2.5-year gap was how the in-pond raceway systems have been adopted by the local growers to help sustainably grow their fish in a better environment. And what's best about that, for me being a soy farmer from Iowa, is that they love using our soy meal for their fish rations. They have been taught, with the help of our expertise, how to switch over from using fish meal and stuff that sinks to the bottom and develop a floating fish meal using soybean oil and meal that gives them better return, less death loss, and not as much disease. We also had the opportunity to visit a feed manufacturer in Cambodia who installed the very first line for aquaculture feed specifically. And this has been a great boon for U.S. grown soy, because he prefers to use that in his feed rations. And then one of the biggest things too, as far as the pond raceway systems, is the early adaptation and the development that continues. The locals have really taken to this way of raising fish, and they keep improving on how to do it, and they keep coming up with better ideas, which I think is one of the things that makes WISH so special, is that as we come in and try to help these countries develop their own food system, we let them take ownership of what they're doing and prepare themselves better to compete in the world and be better community leaders and help themselves. And so I think as a soybean grower in the U.S. and in Iowa, that if I can grow soybeans that can help somebody else across the world eat better and have a better way of life, then I think it's a win-win for everyone. And that I'm proud that almost 22 years ago that the leaders at American Soy had the vision to create a program called WISH to help the world eat better and receive security through soy. So that's all I've got for now, and look forward to the question and answers. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Maury. And we'd like to now bring both Mac and Gina back to the screen so that we can open this up for Q&A. And as they're coming back on, Maury, I'd like to start with you. And again, welcome questions from the audience. I see we've got one that's come in so far, but please enter your questions in the Q&A portion so that we can have your involvement in this webinar today. But Maury, you mentioned the foresight that soybean leaders had over 20 years ago to create WISH. And I actually, because I've been in this business for a while, I remember that very, very well. And some of the initial work that was done trying to develop markets in so many of these areas around the world. But give us a little bit of your perspective of just how much time it really does take. I mean, this isn't like, somebody wants to buy soybeans and we can ship them to them. This is where you've got training and education and, a lot of relationship building from people who may not be familiar with these products. So talk to us just a little bit about the time it takes from starting market development under this program, and then I'd like Gina to jump in as well.
Okay, Sarah. Well, I guess to use an old analogy, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. With the way WISH goes about it, they survey the landscape, so to speak, first, and understand the culture and figure out what the population needs and wants. WISH does not go in there and tell them what they need. They help them understand what they are using and how they can better themselves. And so, like you mentioned, that relationship building takes time, and that's why I thought trade missions like the one I've been on, Cambodia, are so important, because the people understand that we're here to help them. We're not trying to tell them how to do it. we just trying to help them live better for themselves and their community. And so, like I said, it's just an ongoing process, and it's cultural that we make sure that we understand their ways and how they do things, and that we are there as a learning resource so that they can help themselves, and that we're just help them support what they want to do and try to make them appreciate what we have to offer with U.S. soy.
Thank you. Gina, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks, Maury, for mentioning the relationship piece. That's so key in what WISH does. And we have a really great team that have lived and worked in developing emerging economies before they joined WISH. So we know a little bit about what it's like on the ground. But really, in some of these markets, we're literally laying the groundwork. We're starting at the very basic, teaching them about, or explaining them the benefits of soy. So when I managed our Amplifies Ghana project for WISH, when I first came on, I was in a very rural area of Ghana. And I had a poultry farmer tell me, after attending one of these trainings, I am committed to using soy as my protein source and my feed. So previously he was using, probably cotton meal, seed, scraps, whatever he could find to put in his feed ration. And, it's that first step of realizing the power of soy as your protein source in your feed. So a lot of times we're just starting at those basic, building those building blocks. And the markets that we work in, there's a lot of factors too that are very unique to those markets, infrastructure challenges, policy challenges, governments can shift within a couple of weeks, and have new leadership. And so there's a lot of factors that play into this. And so it takes a long time to get a market where they are fully ready, where the processing is ready, where the consumers are ready to import US soy. So we always like to emphasize that long-term development when we talk about WISH, because it really does take a long time when you're starting from the groundwork.
If I may add to that too, I'm reminded of a Nigerian proverb that I once heard from a Nigerian colleague, which is, you pour water on the ground ahead of you so that it's cool when you walk, right? So you're preparing and creating an environment that is going to be, primed and well set up to advance going forward. And I think a nice illustrative example, China. We know that it's the world's largest consumer of soy, world's largest importer of whole soybeans. And, the American soybean industry first set up an office there, I think, over 40 years ago. And we didn't have a commercial sale of soybeans to China until the 1990s. So it's putting in that early work to establish those relationships, and I think just uncover that there are possibilities in many of the markets in which WISH works, and some of the earlier stage markets that USAC works in, the Soybean Export Council. The soy is not a domestically cultivated crop. So a lot of downstream users might not have familiarity with it. Gina mentioned in a lot of the markets that she's worked in, might be, backyard scraps and other things. And if you don't have the awareness of it, you can't, prosper with it. So that's why the mission of WISH is so critical and important. It's uncovering and demystifying the opportunities of utilizing soy to increase and improve the human condition in many parts of the developing world.
Oh, some good analogies there. Gina, one of our questioners wants to know if nutritionists are involved in your efforts. And I would, they didn't specify which, but I would guess that both animal nutritionists as well as you're thinking about human nutrition when you do these projects. Could you elaborate on the technical expertise that WISH brings to any of these development projects?
Absolutely. We work really closely with our land-grant universities in the U.S. There's a lot of research being done at those universities, a lot of experts that are there. We also work with organizations like S&I Global, which work closely with USB as well. So we're really tapping into their efforts and their knowledge when it comes to both the animal feed and the human food. So we provide that technical assistance. We have those experts on the ground in the country. They're working with our supply chain partners and key accounts to address very specific concerns that those companies may have. We also provide technical assistance to, the processing factories themselves. So learning how to maintain your equipment, making sure that you're mixing properly, training nutritionists that work within those companies as well. And we did that a lot with our Amplifies project in Ghana. We actually sponsored some master's students that went to Kansas State and got their master's in feed nutrition from there, and then went back to Ghana and been working in the poultry industry. So we really like to utilize those experts from the US and within the markets in which we work. So we are constantly working to make sure that we have the most up-to-date scientific information to promote as well.
And if I may, because I feel like it's a really relevant question that's on a lot of people's minds when you hear soy, is the question about, nutrition. And I can't underscore enough, please, if you have any questions about that whatsoever, please check out sniglobal.org, the Soy Nutrition Institute, as Gina mentioned. There's a lot of great peer-reviewed research in there that helps demystify, where soy fits into human and animal health. I think it's good to have questions about food, and it's great to research them as well. So I want to put that asset out there, sniglobal.org.
Yeah, I'm glad that you referenced that, Mac, because we do get questions about, soy's role in human nutrition. And there's also a lot of great research going on at these land-grant universities. I know Ohio State, the Ohio State University has done some work as soy being incorporated in nutraceuticals for human health and to fight cancer. And so there's a lot of things that are out there in the research field that would be good for people who have questions to dive a little deeper than we'll be able to on this webinar today. I want to throw another question that did come in for back at you, Mac, though, and that is, how does this overall global shift in protein preferences play out when you look at food security writ large? I mean, we do have a lot of countries that are encouraging more plant-based protein. Is that factor into how you're able to work with some of these new markets or not?
Absolutely. And I think that the world of food and agriculture, the analogy that I use a lot is it's a mosaic approach. Whether it's systems of cultivation or, downstream systems of what we actually eat and consume as people, there's no one size fits all approach. Diets are different, preferences are different. There are different, excuse me, this out of the way. Cats can be very distracting, can't they? Anyway, so, when we look at systems of cultivation, we talk about non-GM or conventional or genetically modified or organic, and there's no perfect way to do it. There's no optimal way to do it. There are different systems of cultivation that meet, what a farmer's operations look like and also what the end user demands are. We also think about soy as an industry, at US particularly, as a provider of choice. So when we go downstream and we look at dietary changes and we look at the growing market that is plant-based protein, certainly from a volume standpoint, our biggest consumers of soy are chickens and then pigs on second order. But that's not to say that we're not also prepared to serve and deliver soy solutions for other forms of protein. Certainly in Cambodia, as Gina and Maury know, I think certainly better than I do, fish is a huge part of the diet there. And you have to meet end customers where they are. We're not going to, look at this and say, oh, we have better utilization opportunities of soy if diets change more to, poultry and pork. Those are important. But if the culture and the systems of production there are more oriented towards fish, or the preferences are more oriented towards plant-based proteins, we have the benefit of an incredibly versatile crop that provides, high protein content nutrition that can serve all of those needs. So, I think as we go forward and we look at some of those, staggering top line numbers, potentially 10 billion people by 2050, ascension of the middle class in many parts of the developing world, which is exciting because when people move into the middle class, that's when diets get better and health and nutrition get better as well. We want to serve that in whatever way that we can. And it's a mosaic approach that will get us there. It's not just feeding, ruminant animals. It's not just feeding, pigs and chickens. It's not just feeding fish, but the whole ecosystem there together.
And Maury, I know that as a grower, if you found out that there was a fascinating new market for a specialty type of soybean or really any sort of crop, growers are eager to find long-term markets for delivery around the globe. But one of our questioners wants to know whether or not there should be concerns about supply. You were talking a little earlier. I know it wasn't the best moisture conditions for you, but tell us just a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground.
Well, going back to the supply question, I've always been a firm believer that, an Iowa farmer or a U.S. farmer or a farmer around the world, if there's a way for them to grow something, they will do it. And so as markets and technical assistance helps grow around the world, I do not foresee any problem with supply between, we hope that it's the U.S. that supplies it, but we know that other people grow soybeans also. And so I think as a global perspective, I would not be concerned about supply. This year in central Iowa anyway, we have been dry, but like we were talking, earlier that I'm not disappointed in the yields. I would say that they're average what we've been expecting in the last 4 or 5 years. Last year was a phenomenal year, but you've got, when you're in the farming business, you expect those challenges and changes, and you do the best you can with what you've got, and then next year you see what you can do better.
Absolutely. Gina, and just to elaborate on that question a little bit more that came in from George, what are the major impediments to growth of your program?
That's a really great question. And I mentioned some of the many factors that are at play in developing emerging markets. Cost of inputs is a big driver. And especially when it comes to US soy, we tend to be on the higher price side, even though we know quality-wise and availability-wise, it is the preferred choice. But our markets are so price sensitive that it takes a while for a company to be at a point where they can really see the economic benefit of using US soy. With that, financing, access to financing and capital is also a really big challenge in our markets. When we were in Cambodia, we learned that they cap out interest rates at 13%, which, knowing how high they are in West Africa, 13% seems like a steal. In West Africa, interest rates can be 24 to 40%. So it's almost impossible for companies to invest in equipment to expand their processing or add a new processing line or invest in new product development when they're having to pay 24 to 40% of interest rates. So WISH is always looking at new ways to help our supply chain partners and key accounts. With these issues, we're constantly trying to find innovative ways to work with other thought leaders, work with associations. So Maury and our other grower leaders were able to meet with 2 associations in Cambodia, the Livestock Raisers Association and the Cambodia Aquaculturists Association, because we see them as a really great conduit to, addressing challenges that exist in that country. So by having an association that has value chain actors, they can then help educate their government on policies that better benefit, their industry and get them to a place that they need to be. So we had a great roundtable. Our grower leaders were able to sit with probably about 50 of the association members, and just ask questions and give their feedback on, the value of associations. So that's one tool that we're using to address some of these challenges as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So just as we talk about how markets are selected, there was a question that came in from Chris, and another questioner had also asked, you've talked about Cambodia. I know Vietnam has been, you mentioned Ghana. Where do you see the biggest potential? And then how do you go about deciding, okay, this is our next target? And just give us some insight on the selection process as you go forward, Gina.
Right. So we start every new market with a market assessment. We go in, we see what the opportunities are within the different sectors. So whether it's livestock, aquaculture, human food, what processing exists, what the infrastructure looks like, do they have access to ports? How do they receive inputs? Are there market access issues, to really give us a full picture of what the opportunity looks like. And so then once we get that report back, if we decide to move forward, we start working on finding those in country, like an in-country representative that can help navigate the cultural norms and give us more insight into the local market. And then we start with our capacity building programming. And so one thing to note is that we work in market sectors. So if you're familiar with the U.S. Soybean Export Council, there's some countries where you'll see both WISH and USAC doing work, but we're working in different market sectors because different market sectors can grow at different times, depending on local demand and capacity. So one market sector that we're seeing a lot of opportunity in, both across Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, is aquaculture. So aquaculture production is growing worldwide for a variety of reasons. One, wild-caught fish, that stock is starting to deplete. There's also political issues of, maybe a country coming in, having a fishing fleet under their flag, but fishing, in a different country's waters. And, the sustainability aspect of aquaculture is important to note. And fish is already a culturally appropriate protein source in many of the countries around the world. So they're already eating fish. So this is really just a way to help make their production more efficient as well. So as a whole, the aquaculture sector, we're really seeing growth in many of our markets on that. We just moved into Zambia and Southern Africa, a little bit of aquaculture and then livestock. We're also starting programming in Kazakhstan, mostly focused on the poultry industry. So those are kind of our two newest markets, but we're constantly looking and keeping our ears to the ground of new opportunities in places really around the world. Rory, I don't know if you have anything to add from your experience on WISH or some opportunities that you've seen through your travels as well.
Well, I think you kind of nailed it, Gina. It's just I know the Kazakhstan thing kind of got pushed to the back because of the Ukrainian situation. And, we also have to be cognizant of when we go into these developing countries as far as security and safety for the people also. And so that's a big concern. And, it's something that WISH and all of our contractors, we don't take that lightly. So we make sure that it's a safe and workable atmosphere and environment so that hopefully we can accomplish what WISH needs to do.
Yeah, I know that I was on a mission with some of the WISH folks, as I said, quite a long time ago, but there are certainly some areas that I don't think people would want to go back to right now if we don't have stable government in these countries, or if there's a risk of any harm that could be done to anyone working in those countries. It's something you've got to be on the lookout for. Mac, you certainly talked about the needs in a lot of different countries. There's such an overall concern about global food security right now. And part of that has been because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Can you just talk a little bit more about why this has had such an economic impact, not only in Ukraine, but around the globe, because of the production that should have taken place in Ukraine, at least on sunflowers and other crops, and then also has not been able to move as easily as it should to export markets. So could you just share a little bit more about that impact of the war?
Yeah, and it's an impact that has a lot of tentacles. Bear with me as I ramble on for a few minutes here. So first off, from a soy standpoint, let's think about what Ukraine's production is. It produces about 4 million tons annually. By comparison, we in the US this year, we're going to have a crop, I think, around 118 million metric tons. So Ukraine, relative to global production, is relatively small for soybeans. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other impacts that are felt both through other crops that they produce in greater quantity, as well as the Black Sea being a corridor for exports of those crops, but also fertilizer that's produced in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. So the other crops that are really notable coming out of Ukraine, of course, are corn, wheat, and sunflower seed. Sunflower seed oil is one of 4 major globally traded commodity oils, the other 3 being palm, rapeseed or canola, and of course, soybean oil. And, you know, all of these oils are critical feedstuff or critical inputs to many parts of downstream food production or baking and frying or cooking. And they typically move in a price ladder. So, you know, if you have a production disruption, you know, either a surplus production or a deficit production for one oil, it tends to have ripple effects through the other 3. And even before the war broke out in Ukraine, we had seen production disruptions for all 4 major oils over the last couple seasons. Last year, Canada was absolutely torched by drought in the southern prairies, which really took a lot out of the canola production there. Last season, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, 3 of the major soybean producers, second consecutive year of La Nina, shaved about 30 million tons of production off of their balance sheets. In the sunflower seed oil market a couple of years ago, the EU, Ukraine, and Russia, the 3 largest producers there, all had short crops. And then, of course, structurally, in Indonesia and Malaysia, which produce over 80% of the world's palm oil, we're in an older phase of tree production. Unlike the other crops, palm is is a perennial crop, which produces over roughly a 25-year life cycle. So, you know, much as anything else, as any, you know, type of machine or something that is producing on an annual basis, there are going to be periods of higher productivity and lower productivity just over the growth cycle. And we're in a stage of lower productivity where over the last decade, yields have basically stagnated and trending down for palm oil in those 2 countries. And that's, of course, also against the backdrop of labor disruptions for plantations in Malaysia. From COVID, much of the workforce that is used to harvest palm plantations comes from the Indian subcontinent. And so with human border crossings being restricted due to COVID concerns, you didn't have the labor supply in there. So like that's all happening on the oil front. And that's before the invasion. Then we get to the invasion and you see the possibility of exports, you know, basically not even coming out of the Ukraine and Black Sea. That added a lot to overall insecurity in markets and an overall risk levels. So prices go up in response. The other major factor is, of course, fertilizer. Now, in the U.S., I think we're fortunate that we have a very robust, domestic production of fertilizer. You know, we're better insulated than other markets. Brazil, for example, I think is about 90% reliant on imported fertilizers, predominantly from Russia and Ukraine, or predominantly Russia, I think. So, you know, even as we're insulated, well, fertilizer is still a globally traded commodity. And, you know, as is the case with any commodity, if you have a shortfall in production or availability in one part of the world, the prices for everything else buoy up. And that's part of one of the contributing factors to why we've seen a lot of, margin constraints for farmers in the U.S. So that fertilizer piece, this year, we're up 27% relative to last year. And last year, fertilizer prices had, scaled up significantly, even in advance of the conflict here. And it's not just fertilizer that's compressing farmer margins. You also have crop protection. You also have, machinery, parts. That's the other thing too. A lot of parts that are needed for servicing agricultural machinery are using minerals that are produced in the Black Sea. And we've had enough supply chain constraints for, other machinery parts emanating from COVID. So, some of the acute things that are needed, be it, nickel, for example, a lot of that's mined in the Black Sea. So, it really reaches, it really reaches a lot of different channels through which we're seeing disruption globally. Now, fortunately, through some of the deals that have been brokered with the United Nations, there have been, ships have been able to get out of the Ukraine and get to some of those developing markets to deliver those critical grain and feedstuffs. But it's not at the volume that we traditionally see. It's more encouraging than I think we would have seen a couple months ago. But there's still a couple other knock-on effects there. One, it's not the same availability coming out of that corridor going to developing markets. And also, Ukraine itself, if it's not able to export at the same level of volumes in prior years, what do you have? You start to have a backlog. And there simply isn't the storage availability to manage all that. So that's also a bit of a detriment to Ukrainian farmers as well. So lots to come out of the conflict, which is unfortunately still ongoing. Producers there, as well as I think the global community, we're looking for a resolution so that all of those, those tentacles of negative impact on commodity markets and farming can eventually recede. So we're hopeful that we can come to a resolution at some point.
A lot of different tentacles that have impacted all of us around the globe from that invasion. We've got a question from Ghana. Mr. Mark says he's a farmer and entrepreneur, and he wants to know what ASA and WISH can do to help the farmers in Ghana who are suffering from a lack of modern technology get better yield, both to sustain their demand at the processing plants and to serve for local consumption and animal feed. So Gina and Maury, Mac, I'll let you all jump in here on that one to help this farmer from Ghana.
Well, Akwaba Mark, welcome. Glad to have you joining us. So thank you for this question. WISH really works once the grain has left the field. So working in post-harvest storage, post-harvest loss, connecting with, buyers. But we do work with partners in places like Ghana that do work on the agronomic side. So one is the Soybean Innovation Lab. That is a U.S. Agency for International Development, Feed the Future Lab, housed at the University of Illinois. And they do a lot of work. So I'm sure most of the farmers that you're working with are up in the northern region of the country. And I know that SIL is very active up there. So if you want to reach out to myself, I can put my email address in the chat box, and we can get you connected to our Africa team and to help make those connections. And because they're doing a lot of work on the ground, I knew they do a lot of outreach to farmer groups there on improved agronomic practices. And they would be able to direct you to the best resources. And then, obviously we work kind of further down the value chain, and would love to be in connection with you on that.
Thanks, Gina. And Maury, I don't know if you'd like to comment on this at all, but I think sometimes we do take for granted that American farmers have access to so much more technology than farmers in many other parts of the world, because we have a great regulatory system to make sure that these products are safe. And when you do have good weather, your yields are going to be that much stronger than many others can claim. So I just wondered if you'd want to pitch in here a little bit about how important technology is to your ability to produce and address global food security.
Well, so true, Sarah. And like I say, I think myself and my neighbors and all across the country, we do take it for granted that we have, the best available if needed. And not having been to Ghana, but from what I understand from Gina and other people that have been there through WISH and other trade missions, it seems like Mark needs to be the one that keeps pushing to get stuff accomplished from what I've heard and talked with other people. So the resource that Gina just referred him to, if he can get in contact with them and basically kind of be a thorn in their side, that maybe he can get some traction and get some help for what's needed to make his operation in Ghana grow. Mac, you got anything else?
Oh, I think you two covered it fantastically there. You know, it takes a lot of partnership and coalition to build this, but it all starts with, you know, identifying where there's an opportunity and clamoring for it. So, you know, as Gina, you know, kindly offered, take her up on following up there. She's really the person to talk to about advancing this.
And Mac, one more question for you. I know we're drawing near a close here, but there has been a lot of talk about additional investment in soy processing in the U.S. Give us your thoughts on how that's going to impact the accessibility to soy protein for others around the globe.
Goodness, I wish we had more than a couple minutes left because we could really put together a whole graduate course on this particular topic. It's probably something I've been asked about and talk about more than anything else over the balance of the last year. But, you know, here we are in the U.S., and just to level set, we crush about 2.2 billion bushels annually. It's about 60 million tons. And we've had announcements of new and expanded crush facilities within the U.S., capacity announcements on the order of, you know, about 650 to 700 million incremental bushels. So scaling up domestic crushing capacity by around 25%, 25 to 30%. So what this means going forward is that as our soy farmers continue to innovate and advance and institute continuous improvement on their farms to increase yield and productivity, we're going to be running a lot more of that production through this crush expansion, should it all come to fruition. Now, what that means is we're going to have increased availability of soybean oil and soybean meal. Now, the soybean oil is increasingly likely going to be consumed as we diversify our energy grid in the United States. It's a topic for a whole other webinar, I think, where we can talk about the implications of the renewable diesel push and what that means for the agricultural complex in the United States. But suffice to say, a lot of that oil will, you know, likely flow into those fuel production channels, which I think is important because, you know, diversifying and building a more resilient energy complex in the U.S. is critical for, I think, combating inflation as well as building a more resilient economy for the future. Again, for another day. Let's focus on the meal side for now. Now, the implication with that demand draw really already set on the oil side, we will have increased production and availability of soy meal. Now, I think there are a couple different channels through which we look at this. One, as I said earlier, our biggest overall market for U.S. soy meal is, of course, the animal ag industry domestically within the United States. So I think there's an opportunity for animal ag producers domestically to, you know, increase rations with or the ration share that that soybean meal comprises. They certainly very high quality protein, really the gold standard. So having that in increased prevalence in domestic diets is important, but that's not going to consume it all, and nor would we want it to just all sit within the United States. That value-added protein is important to put into export markets, but so is the value-added soy-based protein in the form of soy meal. And as we look at international markets, particularly those that don't have you know, native crushing facilities, we look at places like the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Latin America. These are all markets that are large consumers of soy meal. Some import whole beans for crush, but a lot, you know, Philippines in particular, our #1 meal export market. These are the places where, you know, we can potentially be exporting more. And I think it's really exciting. We've had an announcement by AGP of an expansion of the Grays Harbor facility, which is an export terminal in Aberdeen, Washington, scaling that up in terms of the volume of meal that could be processed and exported through that channel, doubling that to about 6 million tons annually. So that's another 3 million tons coming just through that facility that can make it into the international marketplace. And we're very excited about that. We talk about the U.S. soy advantages for customers globally in terms of, you know, using U.S. origin meal for increased animal productivity. I mean, that's what's most important if you're an animal ag producer overseas, is how are your animals performing? And we've got some great research on that that's been put out by USEC. I encourage people to check out usec.org for some of the proof points there. So yeah, it's a great opportunity for more and more customers globally and users to experience the positive attributes of U.S. soy. So some will stay domestically for sure, but that export channel is going to be very, very important. And particularly as many markets around the world continue to advance in their own food security and growing out downstream industry.
Well, as you said, Mac, I think we could have another webinar and do some deep dives on that topic, but unfortunately we're out of time. I'd like to close by thanking not only the World Initiative for Soy and Human Health, the WISH folks, American Soybean Association, and the United Soybean Board for their sponsorship of this webinar. Thank all of you who participated for your great questions and for your time today. Thank Maury for taking time away from busy harvest schedule, and hope the rest of your harvest goes well. In case you and any of your other friends would like to watch this webinar again, it will be posted later today on agri-pulse.com, and you'll receive an email when it's available if you were already signed up for this. It was also posted on Facebook, so you can watch it on our Facebook page as well. Thanks for all of your participation. Thanks our speakers, and to all of you, have a great rest of your day.